All right, hi everyone. We're going to make a start now. My name's Rachel. I'm the co-chair. I'm one of the co-chairs for PVACCS, and my partner in crime, Hannah, who is the other co-chair, unfortunately is unable to make it tonight, but she sends her apologies and hopes everyone has a great night tonight. I would just want to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. And thank you again for everyone to coming to our event tonight. For those who aren't familiar with us, PVACCS stands for the Pre-Vocational Anaesthetics and Critical Care Society, and it's aimed at supporting medical students and junior doctors learning the fields of anaesthetics, intensive care, and pain medicine, and kind of supporting their pathway to these fields. And this is our very first year of running, and we're really happy to see all the engagement that we've seen throughout the year with our events and speakers. We're also proud to be affiliated with JMO Victoria, which is the group representing and advocating for junior doctors in Victoria. So I'm just going to go through how we're going to run the event tonight. We're going to start off with our ICU speakers. We'll have a registrar speaking, followed by our two consultants, and then followed by a Q&A session, which will be open to the whole ICU panel. And then we're going to pass on to our anaesthetic speakers, followed by a Q&A at the end for the anaesthetics panel. And the Q&A will be done via Slido. So we'll post this link again, but you can also find this link on the event page. So if you have any questions, please don't post in chat, but post it there. But you can feel free to upvote questions that you want answered, because we'll be starting from the top and going down. And just note that this event will be recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel soon after the event. All right, I'd first like to introduce now our first sponsor for the night. We'll be hearing from Jeff from Grimsey Wealth, and they're a large financial services company who are experienced in advising doctors on many kinds of financial issues. So I'll pass on.
Thank you very much. Okay, lovely. In the interest of time, I'll kick off and quickly introduce myself. So my name is Jeffrey Benici. I'm one of the senior financial advisors here at Grimsey, and thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. Now, Grimsey is a bespoke medical advisory firm. We have been around for 37 years. We deal with time-poor medical professionals on a daily basis, and we have built our practice around your needs. We have thousands of clients across all different stages of their career. But in today's presentation, I'm going to illustrate a client that our practice has helped recently. Throughout the presentation, you'll see a number of QR codes. I will encourage you to scan your phone over it. It will do one of two things. It will put you in the, give you an opportunity to win a gift voucher. And second of all, it will give you an opportunity to meet with our practice and discuss how we can help you. So the simplest way that I can humanise what we do is to give you a live example of a client that we've helped prosper and grow financially. His name's Joseph. He graduated from Monash University in 2014, and he's on his way to becoming a neurologist. When he initially sat down with us in our practice, he was in the Grimsey intern package, and now he's progressed into a private wealth client. When we sat down with him, he had all these hopes, dreams, and aspirations, buying his first home, renovating it, getting married, but he understood his limitations. He understood that he was incredibly time poor, that finance wasn't something that came naturally to him, investing, markets, salary packaging. He understood the complexities and the challenging landscape. So in essence, he wanted to build a team of like-minded professionals around him so he could focus on what he's good at and empower us to make the right decisions for him. This is a timeline of how we helped him. So in year one, when he came into the practice, he was flat-footed. We set up his cash flow and budgeting, and this is so important that you look to do this at the start of your career, because if we can establish the right behaviours around your money at the start of your career, you will carry them with you for the rest of your career. So we understood his surplus and we needed to do something with it. We set up his salary packaging and his tax. And that's very important because the salary packaging landscape does change. It depends on what hospitals you work in. And also by saving money with tax, you've got more surplus that we can use for. In year 2 with Joseph, I caught up with him again and we had established his cash flow surplus. We were saving him money with salary packaging. He had money to invest. So I set up a margin loan. A simple concept of a margin loan is the bank will give you a bit of money and you put in a bit of your own money and we buy a share portfolio with that. Joseph had the surplus. He didn't need the money, so he used it to invest. He also recognised, having worked in the public hospital system, that he's not bulletproof. If something happens to him, his income's not insured, and it's so important that we look at his personal insurance. So we addressed that and we covered both bases. In year 3, we established another personal investment. So the margin loan was Australian shares. The second investment was international shares. So it was a diversified investment. But the power of Joseph starting investing early on in his career enabled him to buy his dream home in year 6. So the power of investing at the start of your career, it will more than likely help you achieve your goals quicker. And Joseph is very thankful for doing that because those portfolios delivered a 10% return each year, and it enabled him to get into his first home quicker. So where is he now? He's happily married. He actually married a student that he studied with. He's renovated his dream home in Mount Waverley. He feels financially empowered. His job is incredibly demanding, so that takes up 99% of his time. But in the near future, they're looking at starting a family. His investments have done incredibly well over the last 6 years, and he's continuing to put money into them because they continue to do well. And we had a chat recently about buying an Aston Martin, but I told him not to because I don't think it's something he should be looking at doing now. But this is a simple understanding of a gentleman who came through our practice, didn't know much, empowered us to make the right decisions for him, and this simply could be you. Now, our package that we're offering is incredibly comprehensive. It's called the Club 100. We limit the package to 100 interns each year. The cost of the package is $149 per month, and this will not be charged until you start working in January. The other thing about that fee, it's also tax deductible, and that's an understanding there of how the advice process works and how we can help you progress to your goals. Now, Club 100 is the package that I'm presenting tonight, and it is incredibly comprehensive. It gives you access to our Grimsby Wealth Portal, which is an online system that shows you a live feed to all your bank accounts, your credit cards, your super funds, your insurance policies, your wills, all within the one centralised application. You'll also be invited to our seminars, whether it's buying a first home, stamp duty, savings, concessions, etc. We'll educate you around that. But there's also 3 tiers to the package that we offer. So the first is the financial planning, and it's incredibly comprehensive. It covers all bases, and as you can see on the screen, that's what it will encompass. The second component is tax and accounting. That's where you'll have an alignment with an accountant who will plan out your package in year tax strategies and everything that's listed there. And then the third component of what we do is lending. So it may not be front of mind looking to buy a property in your year 1, but as you progress through your career, we will facilitate those purchases. The great thing about our practice is we can enable you to get into your first home with a 5% deposit. So if we go back to the example of Joseph, his investment all compounded, and that enabled him to get into his first home. All he ever needed was a 5% deposit. So it was an incredibly well-executed plan, and he brought year before last just at the top of COVID. So that property's done incredibly well too. Now, this is a chance to come into our practice and meet with one of our incredible team. We would love to sit down with all of you, map out your future and get a clear understanding whether Grimsby is the right practice for you. If you just simply hover your phone over the QR code, as I stated at the front of the presentation, it does 1 of 2 things. It gives you the chance to win the gift voucher, and it also gives you an opportunity to meet with us, and we can map out your future and look forward to meeting you all, and thank you for your time tonight.
Thanks for that, Jeff.
No, you're welcome.
You have a good evening.
You too.
As well as everyone else. All right. And now we'll start with our first speaker for ICU, who is Dr. Mercia Eminolu, who is a senior registrar in ICU at the Alfred Hospital in Melbourne. She is originally from Sydney and did her medical training at Western Sydney University and her junior doctor training in New South Wales. And now she's here in Melbourne. I'll pass share screen so you have your slides. Oops. There we go. And here we go. Right.
Great. Thank you, Rachel, for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to speak tonight. I'll be talking to you about ICU in 10 minutes, and then take questions at the very end. We can move to the next slide. So just a bit about my current role. I'm a senior registrar at the Alfred Hospital here in Melbourne, and I've been here for the last 3 years. A big part of my job in ICU, and indeed for all of the critical care jobs, is shift work, because ICU is a 24-hour roster. So you need to be mindful of that when entering this sort of field, whether or not that's something that you can accommodate in your work life. The Alfred is somewhat unique as there's also 24-hour consultant cover, as opposed to other units that I've worked in where the consultant is on call from home and then comes in when they're required. Anaesthetics at the Alfred is the same, and I predict that large units and tertiary centres would probably move towards a system like this in the future, certainly in intensive care and ED, as demand grows and they need to service the population in 24 hours a day. So I work as part of a team. This is one of the main things that I love about intensive care. We round on patients twice a day, the consultants, the junior registrars, myself, as a team, and we work closely with the bedside nurses, the nurses in charge, the physios, the pharmacist, other allied health members, all together to take care of the patients. Procedures can involve anything from inserting a central line or doing a bronchoscopy or intubation or chest drains to tracheostomy or ECMO cannulation. And some of these procedures I perform solo by myself with just an assistant, and others and I perform as part of a team that requires multiple skilled operators. I might transport a patient to radiology for a scan or to another part of the hospital for intervention like the cath lab. This is just all part of my day-to-day job. These are also opportunities to upskill junior registrars and trainees and teach them how to do these things. The external registrar role also provides support for patients outside the unit who need admission. And that's along with the consultant and an experienced liaison nurse. I liaise between the unit and other home teams to develop a management plan to either admit the patient to the unit or to continue their ongoing management on the ward. This is a really great role to get to know the hospital, to get to know the wards, the ED, theatres, recovery, and the retrieval service. And as part of that, I also respond to the MET calls, the medical emergencies, and the code blues. And that can be in the team leader capacity or as part of the team, depending on where you work and how that service is run. Updating families is a big part of the job. It's changed a bit during COVID because we don't do as much face-to-face discussions anymore. Our mainstay of communication is telehealth, video chat, and phone calls. End-of-life care, goals of care discussions, and organ donation are areas in which we are frequently involved or even lead. Sorry, excuse me. These are important conversations to be a part of, and there are mandatory courses that we need to do as part of our training in order to develop these skills. I'm involved in informal bedside teaching every day, teaching junior registrars, HMOs, and medical students that rotate through, but also there are formal teaching opportunities to teach junior registrars at their weekly education sessions, to teach on courses, to get involved in simulation training. And last year I was the coordinator for the primary exam teaching. At the beginning of the year, we're also assigned mentees to help guide trainees through the beginning of their ICU journey. And I also have a mentor who's there for to provide me with support during my own training. There are numerous opportunities for clinical research, if that's your thing. The Alfred and other hospitals have enthusiastic and experienced research-focused consultants. The Alfred is part of the ANZICS clinical trials group that conduct many large studies across Australia and New Zealand that have implications for management, not just here, but around the world. And a trial that's coming out of the Alfred is the Cheer 3 trial, for example, and that's examining patient outcomes after the institution of pre-hospital ECMO for cardiac arrest. So lots of opportunities to get involved. Journal Club is held each week to encourage us to stay current and to encourage us to stay informed about current and topical research. If clinical research isn't your thing, then quality assurance opportunities exist, getting involved in morbidity and mortality meetings and doing audits. There's lots and lots of opportunities. You just got to put your hand up. Next slide. Thank you. So this is a little flow diagram of how I got to where I am. I did a undergraduate medical degree at Western Sydney Uni, and then I did a 2-year internship. So it's 2 years in New South Wales. And I was exposed to ICU and ED, as well as the other ward rotations. I then did a specialised critical care senior resident year. That was 6 months of ICU, and that included a rural term and 3 months of anaesthetics and ED. During this time, I undertook the basic course, which is one of the mandatory courses that you have to fulfil for the college, and it's a basic assessment and support in intensive care. It's pretty comprehensive. And then after that, I applied to the college for ICU training. So I started my junior registrar training at Prince of Wales Hospital. I was there for 3 years, and I rotated to paediatric intensive care and also anaesthetics, which was also rural, the anaesthetics term. And I passed the Part 1 exam. Then I moved to the Alfred to undertake my senior registrar training, and I completed some other rotations like general medicine and some more anaesthetics. And kind of across all of this time, I've completed some more of the mandatory courses and other courses that are useful for my training, like difficult airway, the ALS course, iValidate, which is a communications course, and an echo course. Next slide. Thank you. So the ICU training program is a minimum of 6 years. It's about 3 years of ICU training and then 3 years of other non-ICU training components like anaesthetics, medicine, rural pediatrics, and elective. 6 months of foundation training must be undertaken prior to acceptance into the formal training program. So that was what I did in the critical care year. So that critical care year is really almost a prerequisite necessary, so you can get the foundation training to apply to the college. Other requirements, so there's 2 exams. You have to complete a research project. You need to complete all of the mandatory courses, and of course, assessments. Can never get away from assessments. After that, you can be admitted to the college as a fellow and become an intensive care consultant. Next slide. Briefly about exams. So there are 2 exams which have a very similar structure. The first part, or the primary, and the second part exam, or the fellowship. They are comprised of a written component. So that's 2 150-minute papers comprised of 10 short answer questions and 50 multiple choice questions for the primary, and 15 short answer questions across 2 papers for the fellowship. And that's set up, that's all on one day. And then there's a clinical component, which for the primary are 8 cross-table vivas. And then for the fellowship, there are vivas as well as 2 hot cases, which are examinations of real patients in an ICU and presenting that to an examiner. So there are 2 sittings of these exams per year, one in March and one in August. You can attempt the exam up to 5 times before the college politely asks you to leave, or I'm not actually sure what they do, but you have 5 attempts, and then there's an associated application package and a fee that you have to pay. So the prerequisite for sitting the fellowship exam is that you have to have done at least a year of core ICU training, and you have to submit a form of these observed clinical encounters, essentially someone assessing you in your examination and management structure, and to say that you're ready to attempt the exam and submit that to the college with your application. Next slide. If any or all of this appeals to you, this is a brief slide on the application process. So this has changed recently. I think this is the first year of the new application process, but the intake for new applicants has been reduced to once per year, I believe. And you have to satisfy various eligibility criteria. They're pretty straightforward, and most of it you would already know. So you need to have a medical degree, you need to have completed an internship, you need to be registered with APRA. You have to have completed the 6 months foundation of ICU training, and you need 3 referees. Then you go on to fulfill the selection criteria. So your referees need to complete a structured reference form. You need to submit a structured CV, and this attributes various points to achievements or other conditions. And recognition of prior learning is accepted, I believe. And then you have to pass a situational judgment test. If you want to apply, you need to email the college. I believe that the applications opened in May this year, and they closed quite late, I think in September, just prior to the situational judgment tests. There are 3 attempts to apply, and there's an associated fee. So the College of Intensive Care Medicine of Australia and New Zealand website is down there, and this is just a little link to the structured CV form. It's all available on the college website. It's pretty well laid out if you want to find out more. Thank you.
You're on mute, right?
Sorry, I was muted. Thanks, Mercia, for giving that talk. good / not good to know that we still have assessments many years on, but so this will be great once you graduate. Yeah, finally. All right, thank you. And I'll now pass on to our second speaker, who will be introduced by Anthea.
Thank you, Mercy, and thank you, Rachel. It gives me now great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Professor Andrew Udy. So Andrew is a full-time intensive care clinician and researcher at the Alfred ICU in Melbourne. He has been awarded more than $22 million in competitive research funding, and he completed his undergraduate medical education at the University of Auckland, followed by his ICU training in New Zealand and the United Kingdom and Australia. After a Water Fellowship, Andrew completed a PhD at the University of Queensland, and he explored antibiotic pharmacokinetics in the critically ill. His major academic interests include optimized drug prescribing in ICU, hemodynamic management of severe sepsis, acute kidney injury and renal replacement therapy, management of subarachnoid hemorrhage and traumatic brain injury, as well as critical care nutrition. Andrew is involved in critical care research internationally as the executive member as an executive member in the ANZICS Clinical Trials Group, as well as the co-deputy director of the Australian and New Zealand Intensive Care Research Centre at Monash University. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Professor Andrew Udy. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much for the very warm introduction. And I apologise that I've got to wear a mask. I'm at work. And in fact, actually, I've just got to go back to the intensive care unit shortly. So I won't be able to join you for questions afterwards. But I really appreciate the invitation to talk to you. And I think this is a really great initiative. So we'll just get into it. Now, if you just want to advance the slide, please. Hope it's going to come. While that's loading up, I mean, I think that the key thing that I just want to start with, I mean, I think that intensive care medicine is frankly just an awesome specialty. What attracted me first of all to intensive care so many years ago was the fact that it's a really patient-focused clinical specialty in medicine. We obviously deal with a wide case mix from major trauma victims all the way through to obstetrics and gynecology, pediatrics, cancer patients, hematology patients, etc. A massive variety of different types of patients. But at the end of the day, we're always focused on the patient, and that's what's probably the most important thing. The other key things is that really what it does is it allows you to see the application sort of physiology and pharmacology right there at the bedside. If you just advance one more slide for me. Because you spend a lot of time thinking about, medical school, and then as you progress and to do different specialty training, you acquire all of this knowledge about physiological processes, cardiac function, respiratory function, renal function. You learn a lot about pharmacology, and you get to see this almost on a minute-by-minute basis when you're managing an intensive care patient. You get to utilize these drugs to change these different parameters, and it's incredibly rewarding, and especially from that point of view, that allows to see your endeavor and how that plays out in front of you. There's a massive procedural component to intensive care medicine, and I think that Mercy has already touched on that. We do a variety of different procedures, whether that be central line insertion, arterial line insertion, ECMO cannulation, tracheostomy, bronchoscopy, other sort of minor procedures in the intensive care unit. And that's, I think, therefore, that blend of both being intellectually incredibly challenging in terms of thinking about the patient's physiology, their pharmacology, the underlying disease process, and the sort of procedural component is what's really attractive. And the other thing I think is that intensive care has got an incredibly amazing human perspective. I mean, we are dealing with patients in the intensive care medicine that is probably the worst days of the day of their life, whether they've been a victim of a major motor vehicle accident, they've got complications of surgery, they've had major sort of coronary artery surgery, they've had a complication from chemotherapy. And you're right there trying to guide the patient, trying to guide their family, trying to understand their backgrounds, and often there's an amazing diversity there. And being part of that is an incredible privilege. And it's something that I think that you know, in that acute sense, in that a very acute environment, which can be incredibly stressful, there is this amazing amount of humanity, and that is really what draws me to intensive care medicine is that particular aspect. Next slide, thanks. And so what do I do on a day-to-day basis? You know, what basically, you know, I don't want to go through all of the sort of the nitty-gritty and detail that Mercy has already been through, but essentially as an intensive care consultant, my primary focus, my primary role is right here in this particular side in this photograph. It is spending time at the bedside. It is being with the patient. It is gathering information, is gathering data, informing decisions, making, coming up with a plan, and doing that is really as part of a team. So having a group of junior doctors and nursing staff, physiotherapists that are there to all add to sort of add to the whole experience and to enable sort of more enhanced or nuanced decision making. To be able to communicate that to the team and to be able to communicate that to the family and to the patient is really sort of the primary role that I have. And so the ward round will start in the morning, and we'll just go around the patient, seeing them one by one, trying to come up with a plan, not only for the day, but also potentially for the next few days or even the next weeks ahead, while we think about, first of all, what is the underlying disease process? How can I fix that? Who do I need to involve? What are the different processes or different therapies I need to think about? How can I support this patient's organ function to improve so that they can avoid complications while they're recovering? And how do I communicate that to all the different stakeholders, including family, that are involved in that patient's care? And that's going to take a few hours, a period of time. Then we're going to sort of, you know, identify the tasks and different activities that need to be completed. And then obviously we'll get them done, and then we'll regroup again in the afternoon to undertake another ward round. And that's sort of a general day in terms of clinical practice in a particular pod. There are other roles that I fulfill in the hospital, which might be more around leadership. For example, being the director on call for the hospital, for the intensive care unit, but also having a role in providing some more subspecialty care, for example, around utilization of ECMO, involved in going to other meetings, which might involve looking at things like quality assurance or other sort of leadership activities around you know, rostering or around orientation or education, a variety of things like that. But essentially what it boils down to in a clinical role is being present in the intensive care unit. And so I think Mercy has hit the nail on the head there. The one thing that I think that is really important when thinking about a career in acute care medicine specialty, particularly intensive care medicine, is the fact that you are going to have to be present. This is not necessarily something that you can do by proxy, and it's certainly not necessarily something you can do over the phone. Often, you know, 9 out of 10 times, there has to be a degree of presence when you want to try and make these sort of key clinical decisions. And so that does involve quite a commitment often to the hospital. Next slide, thanks. So I guess I was also asked to just mention some of the sort of key other roles that I undertake. So I have a particular interest in research, and thank you for that very kind introduction and to sort of the all of the different research roles that I've had. But I really chose to have a role in clinical research because you know, I actually find it's really important and incredibly enriching to undertake this work where we try and improve practice. There are so many questions and decisions that I make every day as a consultant intensivist for which there is a lack of really high quality evidence to be able to inform practice. And so, you know, what I try and do is to try and just enable and empower people to do clinical research in order to try and answer some of even the most basic questions. How much oxygen should we give a patient? What blood pressure should we target? When should we start renal replacement therapy? You know, these sort of when should we transfuse a patient's red blood cells? These sort of very simple questions that have plagued us often for a very long period of time. And there have been a number of mentors of mine that have made really important world sort of changing, practice changing discoveries or outputs with their research. And to see the way that they have been translated into clinical care, I think has been amazing to watch. And I think that there are tremendous benefits for people want to work in intensive care, also being enthusiastic and really motivated about clinical research. So I work also part-time at the university. Thank you for mentioning that, where I coordinate a lot of research activity. And that gives me, a useful foil so that I'm not, when I'm at the hospital, I'm present clinically, I'm at the bedside like right now, and having to make clinical decisions and to guide therapy. But then I can leave that role and I can hand over to colleagues, hand over the patient, and then I can step into a non-clinical role, principally at the university, where it can be less, I suppose, intense or less urgent, just as fulfilling and just as rewarding. But it offers a really nice foil to what it is I do, I guess, on a clinical basis. Next slide, thanks. So yeah, COVID. I mean, I couldn't possibly not have a discussion of intensive care medicine without talking about COVID. I mean, essentially, this has been almost, I guess, a world public health disaster, or a world pandemic that has in some way really put the spotlight on intensive care medicine and highlighted just how important intensive care medicine, intensive care practitioners, particularly our nursing staff, are to the delivery of advanced organ support for the critically ill. And it's been amazing, I guess, to be part of a team, particularly here at the Alfred, but even more broadly in Victoria and across Australia, as we try and respond to the demands of this particular pandemic. And one thing which has really been amazing, and again, I can't express just how enriching it has been, is to be part of this team as we battle COVID-19. And of course, there's going to be challenges in every clinical specialty, but intensive care medicine gives you the opportunity to I think, to have reach, even though you are present looking after the patient in front of you, you can have roles that allow you to have reach beyond your hospital and into sort of healthcare systems at a much broader level, both within the state and even nationally and internationally. Next slide, thanks. So thank you very much. I hope that was been enlightening. I'm sorry, I will have to go, unfortunately, but thank you for the opportunity. That's my email. Feel free to, anyone can reach out and get in touch with me. I'm very happy to have a conversation about this, and please enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you, Andrew, for sharing your experiences and highlighting the diverse aspects of intensive care. Thank you for joining us tonight. I will now pass on to Stephen, who will introduce our third speaker.
Thank you, Anthea. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce Professor Patricia Haroon. She is an ICU consultant at St. Vincent's Hospital, Melbourne. She completed her undergraduate degree in Zimbabwe and aspired to be an obstetrician, so her Australian life started off as a journey towards obstetrics. However, an ICU term changed her mind, and she realized how much easier life is when you actually understand the very stressful sick patients. Having trained in the Northern Territory, she has now been at St. Vincent's Hospital since 2015. She has also ended up in education and absolutely enjoys the aha moments when a blood gas or respiratory failure suddenly makes sense. Her goal is to finish her master's in clinical education, which may possibly become her retirement plan from clinical practice. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce Professor Patricia Haroon. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay. Firstly, thank you very much for this great honor. I am feeling very humbled with all the other speakers that I have to go after. I have to apologize, I do not have slides. So obviously I'm the tardier end of the intensivist, but I did write a few notes and hopefully I will have a little bit to share with you. So thank you very much for the wonderful introduction and for asking me to speak. So as you've heard, my journey through to intensive care has been a little bit more circuitous and different to the others in that, well, where I trained, where I did my undergraduate medicine in Zimbabwe, intensive care, it's not a specialty. And if you wanted to practice intensive care, you became an anesthetist. And I realized very early on during my anesthetics rotation that I'm too anxious and too high strung to be in that environment. And I absolutely enjoyed obstetrics and gynecology and thought that's where I'd end up. But as you've heard, things changed and I've ended up in intensive care. And I'll tell you, one of the first things that drew me to intensive care was being a resident on the obstetrics ward, actually, and having a very sick patient and needing to call for help. I think we had a code blue and the ICU team came. Just watching one of the registrars there, it felt like a superhero had just landed in our midst. They were very confident, they knew what they were doing, and everything just seemed a heck of a lot easier for them. And I wanted to be that confident. So I applied the following year to have a term in critical care and did anesthetics and a few other things. And one of the rotations was intensive care. And what I thought I'd get out of that was just a year of looking after sick people, getting a little bit more confident, and then moving on to back into obs and gynae and carrying on with my career. But I actually stayed because it was amazing the amount of confidence that I actually got by feeling comfortable looking after these sick patients. But like my two predecessor speakers have just said, I'd like to echo their sentiments. I think the human aspect in intensive care is probably one of the things that's made me stay. It is such a privilege to look after patients and their families when they're at their most vulnerable. And some of the best moments I've had have been in the face of death and adversity, when you look after families and they actually say thank you and you feel like a part of something very, very special, and hope that when they remember this worst day of their lives, they'll remember some kindness and I guess our ability to help them through that. So what does my day-to-day life look like? Well, it's often variable. Some days I will turn up and have a clinical shift, and then there are days that are non-clinical. I guess what might be more exciting is the clinical shifts, which also are quite variable. So it's always up and down in intensive care. While we look after the patients that we look after and have a structured ward round, we're also involved in supporting the rest of the hospital with MEC calls and at St. Vincent's and structures, such that your ward round could start at bed 1 and then just go all over the place, and you could be doing all sorts of resuscitation, all sorts of variable things. So I do quite like the unpredictability of it. Some of the non-clinical days, which would really be doing rosters or doing some education and teaching, can also end up just being a whole day on the clinical floor, working with the team and looking after patients who deteriorate unexpectedly. I find that quite exciting, and I do quite enjoy things happening out of the blue and the adrenaline that comes with that. So often we, like the other speaker said, we'll have a couple of ward rounds, one in the morning, one in the evening. Lots of education, lots of interaction with the multidisciplinary team. The nurses are a big part of our team, but also the allied health teams. I also enjoy that we actually have some procedures. I realized that, just as I was trying to do the obstetrics and gynae, that I actually cannot stand for very long periods of time in surgery, as often happens in gynae in particular. But I do still like the procedural aspects in intensive care, and they're quite exciting procedures. We do tracheostomies, bronchoscopies, even the less challenging things like central lines can sometimes be challenging, and that's very interesting. I also like the generalist perspective, I guess, and the fact that on any given day we interact with multiple specialties. So you get to know and to be able to talk about a number of different specialties across intensive care and have conversations with the surgeons, with oncologists, with hematologists, with the general physicians. So it really, really, really keeps things exciting in my day-to-day work. My out of work roles, when you first become a consultant, all sorts of things are handed onto your plate. So one of the first things I did was rostering. And then as I spent a few years in the job, I've managed to pass that on and do recruitment and trying to get new registrars. But the thing that surprised me the most, and the thing that's become a biggest part of my non-clinical portfolio, is education. And I think for me, this mainly started because of great educators and great mentors along the way who supported me, particularly through those awful exams that you heard about. And I did my exams, at least the first part exams, in the Northern Territory. So quite an isolating and lonely experience. And so it was good having supervisors to help me through that. So that's how it started. Really, I just wanted to pay it forward and help some trainees going through. But that's grown a little bit. And in addition to, helping with exams at my hospital, I've also been involved with the college in setting up a first part exam process and have also become a college examiner. So while that sounded exciting, I realize it's a large amount of work, and it really keeps me up to date with the physiology and the pharmacology, which forms a huge bulk of that exam. In this last year, I've become a supervisor of training as well. So lots of, obviously the supervision and feedback, but also the mentorship and just maintaining those relationships with the trainees as they come along. I think that keeps me young, so I quite enjoy that role and my involvement in supervision and training. As you've heard, I'm undertaking a master's in clinical education, and hopefully that will, help me to, as in terms of the foundation of my training. And I do hope to have a bigger role in the future in the college around curriculum reform and making sure that, the exams, which traumatized me so much in the past, can be a thing that really, really evaluates what people have learned and helps us to have intensivists that we would like to work with and that maintain the standard that the college upholds so well. So in terms of other education stuff that I do, so apart from the stuff that I do here, I've been involved in international education with a group called Pangea, formerly known as Doctors Without Borders. And that was started by a surgeon who trained in South Africa and wanted to give back. And so goes back to Africa, initially Rwanda, and then later Malawi and Zimbabwe to teach. And I've been a part of that until recent times with COVID, where we haven't actually been able to go overseas. Pros and cons of doing ICU. I think the things that are the pros of doing ICU are probably the things that might be the cons as well. So it is shift work. The hours can be unpredictable. Patients will deteriorate just when you want to go home. So if you are on a clinical day, and we have the on-call system, some days I think I'm going to get out at 6:30 and I'm there until 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock. And some days you have to go back in the middle of the night. So it's really hard to say, I'm definitely going to be at dinner on Friday if you have clinical shift work. So being a bit flexible and nimble in that. I think what I like about that is in the teamwork that it fosters, because we spend very long shifts and we spend a lot of time together, and we spend time working through very difficult situations, sometimes with families. It means the people that I work with become a little bit like family. And certainly in our unit, which is much smaller than the Alfred, very, very small unit, it is quite intimate. And we, when times are good, when we're not in lockdown and living the COVID life, we'll often have Christmas parties together. We'll have tennis competitions, within the unit, and just do things together to de-stress and support each other. So I think if you like the teamwork, then and you like and you don't mind the shift work, then I think those are some of the things that could make it entertaining and that make it a worthwhile career. I think the shift work means some days I'm off on a Thursday and I can go to the bank, whereas if you work Monday to Friday, then those little things become really difficult, but also they can be challenging. So I was on call last night and I had to go back in the middle of the night and had to go back and work again today. So the days when you feel very, very tired, the days when you lose young patients, and that can be confronting and challenging, and the days when the interactions, especially with the other teams coming through, are not so easy. So those can be challenging things, but they can also be rewarding as you develop those relationships and work together as a team. So that's really all from me about intensive care. And if I didn't say it before, I'm glad that I ended up here, quite enjoy what I'm doing. And while a lot of it is a surprise because it was just never the path that I foresaw, I'm glad that it's worked out this way. Thank you. That's all for me.
Thank you so much for that, Patricia. That was really eye-opening. And I will now throw back to Rachel.
All right. Thank you, Patricia and Versia and Andrew, who I presume has left. I guess we'll move on to some questions now. So let me change. If you're feeling brave enough, also feel free to unmute and ask questions. Ask a question in person if you like. Otherwise, we'll start off with the first question, which is, so this is open to either of you. How vital is it to get those HMO2/HMO3 critical care jobs in terms of getting onto a training program in the future? And what if one misses out / does something else?
I can try answer that in the first instance. Not that I know anything about job recruitment, but obviously the foundation ICU term or time is a prerequisite to entry. The thing about that is it has to be in a unit that's accredited by the CICM. And I think there's a list of them on the college website. So I'm not entirely sure if you can like certainly for me, I accomplished them in 3-month blocks. It wasn't a 6-month continuous block, so that shouldn't be a barrier. But I don't think that there's anything wrong with taking a somewhat circuitous route, as Patricia was telling us about in her own training journey, to getting into ICU. Everything is useful and helps you become a better and more well-rounded doctor, I think. So I think if you miss out 1 year, try again the next year. Yeah, it's definitely something that you should do. But yeah, I think that everyone has a different journey. So yeah, don't feel too stressed.
I think I absolutely agree with that. As someone who does recruitment, this is a question that we often have to answer. Obviously, you do need some ICU time to be, signed off and to get a reference to get onto the training program. But I cannot, agree enough that if you end up taking the slightly more scenic route, then all that experience is going to be great. I think one of the things that's happened in the last few years with the College of ICU is that we've become a single stream training program, where in the past you'd come in from, all sorts of background and specialties. It's got its advantages and disadvantages. And I think one of the advantages is certainly that we can, the training program is a lot more structured, but I think one of the disadvantages is you miss out on all of the specialties. So I work in a unit where, a lot of the intensivists are respiratory physicians, we've got cardiologists, we've got anesthetists, we've got ED physicians. So all of those people bring all of those skills, and it makes it easier to manage the patients and to, I guess, bring all the perspective from all the different specialties when you're looking after the patient and all the specialties come in and put in their opinions. It does help to have an understanding of some of these issues that they're talking about. So if you end up doing a year of being a med-reg, or you end up doing a surgical year, I think that's all experience that is going to help. What would I recommend in terms of maybe making yourself more attractive for these jobs? You will work in networks, you will know some of the intensivists. Just go and introduce yourselves and talk to people and say what your interests are. And then people can try and help you and guide you to get there, so that you get at least those first 6 months of foundation training. I guess the other thing is also to say, to get started in this and to work out whether you like it at all or not, you don't always have to be in a tertiary center or even in the city. There are many other places, smaller intensive care units, that might actually help to work out whether this is something that you might want to do, or this might be something challenging.
Thank you for that. Those extensive answers. The next question is, if ICU consultant positions are limited by the number of ICU beds in the country, what are the odds of a current student getting a consultant job in 10 years?
I think reasonably good, because the current intensivists are getting older and they will retire and there will be new jobs opening up. I think also additionally, new units are being opened up in many places. When I was training, I worried about not getting a job. But I can tell you, I don't know an intensivist who's not gotten a job or not worked. So I think if this is something you want to do, there will always be opportunities. A lot of intensivists are also moving towards a part-time working model and doing other things and focusing on those research things or education things. So I wouldn't give up because of the ICU beds or the prospects of jobs. I think that this is always something that's worrying when you go through training, but certainly there will be jobs at the end. We will all get old and we will retire, and you guys will step in and carry on.
Thank you. Next question. I hear the courses can be quite difficult to get into due to popularity. Do you have a recommended time in which to do these, e.g. which PGY is ideal?
Yeah, some of the courses need to be done early on in the training, such as the basic course, and some of the courses aren't really appropriate to be done until later. For example, the organ donation course and the workshop. I think it's just a good idea to have a look at all of the courses that you need to fulfill, the face-to-face ones, and try and figure out where they're being offered. There are opportunities in Australia and New Zealand. and when they occur. And sometimes there are wait lists that you can email to get onto, and then to try and negotiate that with where you're working to get days rostered off. So just try and be proactive about it. There's definitely some times that I probably wouldn't recommend, like around the time that you're studying for big exams. Don't try and also get all the courses ticked off, because you're just going to take on too much and do an average job of everything. But yeah, there's, or certainly for myself, I feel like there was a lot of dead space in my training where I probably could have utilized it better to, finish off my training project, but and do the courses. But yeah, they're offered multiple times a year mostly, and just have a think about it, be proactive, and suss out when you might like to do it.
Thank you. Next question is, what can a current medical student do to make themselves more competitive for SRMO jobs or training in the future?
Look, I think, every stage of your training has its own, the things that you need to learn, the things that you need to learn as a student. When we're looking around recruitment and trying to get, HMOs or SRMOs into positions, we're looking for people who have a holistic approach. So I think in the end, you might become a great researcher or you might become a great educator, but in the first instance, we would like someone who can take a history, examine a patient. So when you're doing those rotations and when you're doing those jobs, being attentive to that and getting the most that you can get out of that time, I think are important things. Training is changing, so you've got to, I think to some extent, you're going to be thinking about what the future might look like to maybe set yourself aside from the other candidates applying for the same jobs. But I think, when we're interviewing people, we just want to hear that this is someone who can assess a patient, can call for help, knows what their limitations are, and will, work to build themselves and develop themselves and get, more experience as you go along. Do you want to add anything, Nessa?
Just the structured CV on the college website also has like a pretty comprehensive list of things that the college is looking for: achievements, qualifications, other bits and bobs. So, if research is your passion, I think points are awarded if you have publications and things like that. So just have a look and see if any of that aligns with your values and your background. But yeah, showing enthusiasm. I think that's probably the key. You don't want to hire a robot. People want to work with people who are interested in work.
Good advice. All right. I think might be able to fit in one more question. What's the possibility of switching over to anaesthetic training if you do ICU training and find out it's not for you? And how does dual training work?
So not that I have personal experience in this, but I think there are, there's probably recognition of prior learning that can be for either college. Anaesthetists have to do a certain amount of ICU and vice versa. Dual training, I think, is hard. It has become harder since the colleges have all split off and become their own entities. The College of Intensive Care no longer accepts other primary exams as their primary. And it's a lot more rigorous, and there is going to be additional years of training and more exams to undertake. Not that it's impossible, and there are people who are dual or triple trained, but I think it does require some forethought and a lot of research into how that might fit into your life.
And I'll just add that since the colleges have become standalone, the recruitment processes, or how you apply to the colleges, is quite different. And so the ICU pathway is what you've heard. And while some of the ICU time may count towards your application for anesthetics, there are other requirements that you're going to need for that. So it doesn't just translate into the other one. And if the pathways for dual training could be a little bit of both for many years as you go along, or some people will finish one of the specialties and then you may be exempt from doing the primary for the second specialty. But again, you've got to factor in life and family. A lot of people will start families and all of those other things, and see how that works out for you. It's not impossible, but as Monsieur said, it's getting incredibly difficult now with the colleges completely standing alone.
All right. Thank you both for those answers. We had better finish there, unfortunately, despite the question. But we have so many good questions. But we'll have to start. Yeah, we'd better pass on to anesthetics. But thank you both again for offering your time tonight, for going through those details in terms of pathways and getting to know a bit more about what ICU is like. I know, at least from like a medical school, medical student perspective, it's uncommon to come by to also get some ICU experience. So yeah, really glad that you were able to talk to us today.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hope you have a good night.
Bye.
All the best.
Thanks. See ya. Right. Okay. So it might be good to just we'll take a 1 or 2 minute break just to let everyone shake out their muscles a bit, and then I'll pass on to Nam, who'll be hosting our anesthetics half. Okay.
Hi, Rachel. Hi, Bridget. Hi, Nam.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Thanks for organising it, guys. I've just joined.
Thank you so much for coming.
Fantastic. Heaps of people here.
Looking forward to it. So we'll get started, I guess, then. Before we just start our second part, I'd like to introduce our sponsor today, Claire Berry from Claire Berry Consulting. I'll let you, Claire, introduce the amazing services you offer to us future budding critical care doctors.
That's very kind. I don't know about amazing, but it's really nice to speak with you all tonight. I do personal interview training for consultants to fellows, registrars, all the way, not all the way down to, but at every level, to medical students, in particular for ICU and anaesthetic clinicians. Today I've been training ICU consultants interstate, going for a variety of jobs. So every day is really fascinating when I get to have just a bit of insight into the amazing things that you guys do. In last year, 75% of, and I'm sorry, I've got a bit of a cold at the moment, but 75% of our anaesthetic clients got places on the program, which was a good result. And I trained for all the different networks, including Monash, Northwestern, Alfred, Peter Mac, Concord, Liverpool, New South Wales, Perth, South Australia and Northern Territory. I also do this for ICU. I help my clients answer questions about safety, quality, research, teamwork, pain medicine, trauma, conflict, bullying, which is often a really difficult question to answer, patients, qualities in the workplace. And the questions from panels are always changing. One question that I loved from the Austin 2 years ago was, what would you do if you found a penguin in the freezer? I think that's, Brett, I think I know you're the very senior at the Austin, so I thought I'd put that in. That
was my question, yeah.
It was your question. Can't tell you the amount of grief you caused some of my clients. But look, what I love about my job is that I help incredibly talented and very modest people who don't enjoy interviewing and get referred to me because often they might have failed the first year, even 2 years, and they're so good at what they do, they're just not good at selling themselves, which you don't need to be in medicine to be a team player. In fact, often I suspect it doesn't make you a nice part of the team. And these people come to me and I get to help them get the jobs of their dreams, which is a really satisfying. I've been doing this for 12 years. Most of my clients are referred to me or it's word of mouth. You can find lots of information on my website, which is just clareberryconsulting.com.au. And most people, although they may not admit it, will have done some sort of interview training at some point in their career. There are some specialties that have a higher rate than others of not admitting that they have interview training, which, because this is being recorded, I won't list those specialties, but it's certainly not ICU and it's certainly not anaesthetics. And that's really a summary of what I do. I've helped thousands of people get jobs over or help them sell themselves and perform at their jobs over the last 12 years. And you're welcome to email me with any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Awesome.
I'm aware of your time. So
thank you so much, Claire, for that. You'll be seeing me in the next couple of years, don't worry. Interviews are the bane of my existence. Okay, now moving on to the rest of our night. I'm very excited to introduce our amazing panel of anaesthetists. So we have Dr. Bridget Bishop, Dr. Brett Pierce, and Dr. Ned Douglas. Thank you so much for being here tonight and giving us an insight into what life is like as an anaesthetic doctor. So just like our ICU night, we'll first hear from our three lovely speakers before we open the floor up to questions. And would love if you guys would, if you're brave enough, to unmute yourself to ask the questions, or feel free to post it anonymously in Slido. So I'll pass it on to Taveen to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Bridget Bishop.
Thank you, ma'am. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Bridget Bishop. She is currently a anaesthetic registrar in the Northwest Training Scheme, undertaking her 3rd year of training, working at the Royal Children's Hospital of Melbourne. She's a proud Geelong Cats fan like myself, which is good to hear. And it's a real pleasure to hear from her today. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just thought I'd let Lucy come and say hello to everyone before I ignore her for the next period of time. Great. So yeah, I'm in my 3rd year of anaesthetic training. So I think that makes me 6 years out of medical school. But once upon a time, I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I was in your shoes trying to work it out. So I'm just going to chat about my personal sort of medical career and how I settled on anaesthetics. I'll provide a bit of advice about rotations and CV building activities you can do, and then provide a bit of insight into application processes from my perspective, and wrapping up with why I think anaesthetics is great and what my day-to-day life is like. when I was in medical school, I definitely changed my mind quite a lot about what I wanted to do. I remember at one point thinking emergency medicine, ortho, I think at one point, and gastroenterology. And it was actually through doing a hepatology research project in my final year that involved anaesthetics that I met anaesthetists. And I remember actually, if I think back on it in medical school, like I think I only had like a week of formal like anaesthetic time, and it was always just sort of these mysterious doctors in the hospital that I never really had anything to do with. So doing that research project by accident gave me exposure to this anaesthetic department and what the life of an anaesthetist was like. And so definitely that stuck with me. In terms of my intern year, I had a really varied year, lots of variety, and I'd highly recommend that. Yeah, you can skip that slide, ma'am. So for me in my intern year, I did general medicine, cardiac surgery, hepatobiliary, which at the Austin included liver transplant stuff, ED, and spinal medicine, which is like another specialty at the Austin. And I think regardless of what you're interested in, do something varied in your intern year and even in your second year, because I think I have gained really useful experience from all of those rotations. I really liked the sort of critical care nature of medicine that I got to see through doing cardiac surgery, well, not doing it, being the intern, hepatobiliary and ED. And also I found that when I was in theatre, I was often looking over at the drapes that these, people playing Sudoku or whatever, being interested in what they were doing. At that point, I still wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I did a medical year and actually did BPT1 and I did cardiology, and I scored an intensive care rotation, and I did neurology and night cover as well. And that was actually really good doing BPT1 because it was like formal, like learning activities I had to do, formal assessments. And even though it's not something that I pursued in the end, it was something that was valuable because I got an idea of what vocational training was like. But it was really my HMO3 crit care year that solidified everything for me. I remember this is all pre-COVID, of course, skiing at Mount Buller when Brett Pierce gave me a call to tell me I got offered the HMO3 crit care job. And that was a pretty awesome day. So yeah, I did an anaesthetic HMO3 crit care job, and then through there applied to the ANSCA training program and got on the Northwest training scheme. And here I am. So, I guess it is a thing that is changing over the years. But I guess in terms of tips for getting onto anaesthetics, definitely think variety is the spice of life when you're early on in your career. Keep your eyes on that HMO3 crit care year. And then it's from there that's really the stepping stone to get into anaesthetics. And you'll find that the bottleneck, or at least when I went through, was very much at that HMO3 anaesthetic job. I think you need to pace yourself with your CV. You don't want to do too many anaesthetic focused things too early. I mean, you won't really get much out of them if you don't have too much experience. So I think good things to start with are courses like the basic ICU course. I found that useful at the end of my intern year after I'd worked for a bit. Of course, in keeping up to date with the ALS 2, I even went on to do ALS instructing, which was it's a really cool side hustle. And then trying to keep an eye out for any research projects that are happening either as a medical student or as a junior doctor. Top tip, anaesthetic registrars have to do an audit project as part of their training, and I'm sure they would love the help of a medical student to get that done. So every department will have lots of little projects going on, and it's just a matter of finding someone to get involved with something. And I was lucky enough, I actually did a project with Brett. I think I started it at the end of my HMO2, brought it through into HMO3, and then that was a really great addition to my CV for my ANSCA application. As far as applying to the college, you need to build on those things that got you the critical care job. And that's where you start doing maybe some more anaesthetic focused courses. So towards the end of my anaesthetic HMO year, I did the NatCat course, which is an airway course. And, I'm sure there are sort of lots of different courses out there. Obviously, COVID making that a little bit difficult at the moment, but they are certainly out there. And then, of course, the last thing to mention is like conferences. And, I went to the ANSCA annual scientific meeting one year. I went to SMAC when that was a thing. I think they're called CODA now. So just, getting interested in those conferences. And conferences are great opportunities to talk to people and get to know people. So that's an important part of your application, I guess. In terms of why I like anaesthetics, this, Ikigai Japanese kind of Venn diagram kind of explains it pretty well. It combines a lot of things that I really enjoy. I think deep down, I am a bit of a nerd. So the science, biology, sort of pharmacology, physiology aspect of it's really great. And you get to react to things and fix things quite quickly, and it's very satisfying. There's heaps of variety in the job. Like today, I looked after a little girl that had a heart transplant, whereas just 2 weeks ago when I was at the Mercy, I was doing the anaesthetic for a lady having a baby. Like just so much variety in the patient populations as well as the surgeries that are being done. I find it really rewarding. There's often that joke that anaesthetists don't really talk to patients, we just put them to sleep, but I think it's quite the opposite. It's our job to talk to them when they're absolutely shitting themselves and they're so scared and they're so nervous. And it's amazing what people will tell you as their anaesthetic doctor because they're so heightened. And I think it's a really enjoyable part of my job, just getting to know people and helping them feel relaxed with our conversation and maybe a little bit of midazolam, but mostly the conversation. And I really find that rewarding. It's, an evolving specialty. There's lots of learning. And yeah, I'm feeling really lucky that I found something that I like. So in terms of the application process for ANSCA, in Victoria, there are 4 networks: Northwest, which is what I'm in, Eastern, Monash, which includes, I think, Peninsula Health as well. And then there's a relatively new regional program, which involves some of the regional centres. And I'll admit, I don't know too much about that. And I would very much take ANSCA's official, press media releases and updates about this because it is an evolving space. But essentially, it is a CV, a cover letter, references, and an interview, just like any other job. So there's nothing too special, at least not when I went through. I'm in the Northwest, so that involves a really great variety of hospitals, like big tertiary centres like Austin and RMH, other big hospitals like the Western and the Northern. We've got specialty women's in the Mercy and women's. I'm doing my peds at the moment at the Royal Children's, plus there's regional opportunities, for example, at Ballarat, and I think there's a few more. So lots of opportunities to move around and see how anaesthetics is done in so many different contexts, and that's really enjoyable too. You get to meet so many amazing people moving around like that. How am I going for time? I don't want to waffle on too long. Okay, great. So in terms of my day-to-day life, being an anaesthetic registrar, you get allocated either to an elective list, which is like something that happens in the daytime, either morning or the afternoon or both, or you're allocated to after-hours emergency service, where you'll be doing the emergency theatres either during the day, in the evening, or even on nights. And similar to ICU, there are a lot of night shifts as an anaesthetic trainee, but that's often where a lot of the learning happens. So on an elective day, so for example, today I'm at the kids, so I did a couple of cases in the cath lab, and then I did some kids having MRIs. So that was my variety for the day. You look up your lists ahead of time, so you look up what kind of cases you're doing, you look up the patients that you're looking after, make note of any significant medical or anaesthetic history. And then on the day you rock up and you meet them and chat to them and consent them for the anaesthetic. And then you do the list. So, you know, you're putting in drips, managing airways, managing anaesthetics, managing pain. You know, yeah, again, a lot of variety there. You know, it's relatively early mornings, but if you're efficient and you finish on time, sometimes you can sneak away, which is nice. But equally, sometimes hanging around to do extra stuff is also great for learning. And of course, yeah, the after hours, I guess, is somewhat similar, but you're just doing emergency cases. So yeah, you're sort of working it out as you go along. Anaesthetists have many roles in the hospital though, and just outside of theatre. So there's pain rounds and pain reviews, both acute and sometimes chronic. There's pre-admission clinics where you go do outpatients and you meet people ahead of their surgery and get to have a really good chat to them about their medical issues, see what you can optimize, set their expectations for their surgery. And yeah, the perioperative medicine space is something that's certainly evolving and getting bigger. So there's honestly just, yeah, heaps of variety within that. And that's what I love about it. So now I'll show you get you to show the next slide, which is probably a more accurate representation of what anaesthetics is like. It's a really good lifestyle. You get to meet some really awesome people. There are moments of high excitement and, you know, and there is a bit of downtime sometimes, but even, you know, for me, I get a lot of satisfaction out of the basics. Sorry, excuse my dog barking in the background. The other bit that I find interesting is that a lot of people don't really know exactly what we do, but I really like reassuring patients that I'm there to make sure that they're safe and comfortable and that I don't leave their side for the entire case. And I think that's really reassuring to people. It's a career that's allowed me to work in really great hospitals, get a house just recently, get my lovely dog. And I haven't mentioned the exams, but maybe we can talk about that in the Q&A, that old chestnut.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bridget, for that. You're making the process sound a little less daunting and the lifestyle sound amazing. So I'm looking forward to it. Now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Brett Pierce. He's a consultant anaesthetist, mostly working out of Austin Health with some private work as well. He specializes in complex surgeries, especially hepatobiliary surgery, and is one of a handful of anaesthetists that can do liver transplants in Victoria. He completed his medical degree at Monash University before going to the UK to do the higher level training for 12 years before coming back here. He holds multiple titles, one of them being the Deputy Head of Anaesthesia at the Surgery Centre at Austin Health, as well as the Honorary Clinical Lecturer at Melbourne University Medical School. He has a very strong interest in academics with over 20 peer-reviewed papers and is actively engaged, as we heard, in teaching and training the next generation of anaesthetists. It is my great honour to introduce Dr. Brett Pierce.
Thanks very much, Nan. Appreciate the intro. I'm often asked, you know, why anaesthesia? And I hear a lot of different answers from my trainees why they like anaesthesia. And it's horses for courses. Like, a lot of people love the physiology, being able to change it and see the immediate effects. So 20 years on, every time I give propofol and the patient falls asleep, I think, wow, it's like a magic book for a little kid. You know, it's a little potion in my hand that makes people fall asleep. And if the blood pressure drops, I can give something and fix it, and I can see the blood pressure change. And that feedback loop is great for developing skills, and you know, I'm a bit of a geek for that kind of stuff and improving things. I love the fact that you get to do procedures as well. So it's a bit of a thinking specialty as well as a doing specialty. So today I've done a couple of lumbar punctures. We did central lines, arterial lines, put in tubes, you know, as well as the drugs. So that's quite lovely. and we get great teams and fantastic trainees. So what's not on there is I'm the HMO supervisor at the Austin Hospital, and we get lovely doctors like Bridget come through our doors, and we see them go from sort of you know, slightly scared,
Useless, I think the word is.
useless, that's right, yeah, absolutely useless, you know, green-eyed, you know, wide-eyed, nervous wrecks, into these very competent, astute, fantastic doctors, and Bridget's been great, and she can put me to sleep anytime. So I think a lot of the kick I get out of my job is now not from anaesthesia. I mean, like a lot of medical jobs, when you get 20 years down the track, you just do your job and it comes second nature, and you end up doing other things like research and administration. So, you know, looking after the department, and doing education and looking after the next generation of people. And that's what I love doing. We don't even just do anaesthetics. Anaesthetics, as Bridget was saying, you know, I was a pain specialist for a while. You know, we do the peri-op stuff. I do my liver transplant stuff. We can subspecialize. So there's a whole bunch of different sub pathways you can go to, and you guys have no idea of this because you never meet an anaesthetist. And it's very unfortunate because it's almost, you never get a chance to try it until it's too late almost, you know, so you've got to land your HMO job. And the problem with the HMO job, as you quite succinctly summed up from Bridget Nam, is it's a great lifestyle specialty, which makes it very appealing and everybody wants to do it. So we have about 150 to 200 applicants every year. And we have 10 jobs, 6 in the anaesthesia stream and 4 in the acute care stream. So we're only taking the best of the best. And because we take the best of the best at the Austin, I always say we take the Ferrari. So all we have to do is give them a tune up and they get onto the program. I've had an incredible success rate of getting doctors on the program. I think we're at 95%. So I think that beats Claire's record of 75%. But who's counting? But to be honest, like I say, I start with Ferraris. You know, the people at Monash maybe start with Commodores or something. What else? So it's really competitive to get on. What you need to do to get a job with us is get ahead of your peers. And it's not rocket science. It's do what you're interested in and do it well and build your CV. So if you're into education, educate people. If you're into charity, you know, be involved in charitable work. If you're into research, do research. If you're into audit, do audit. If you like them all, do them all. You might just get an interview then. But I think what we really do want, and I think when I just heard the end of the ICU speak, is we want people with that are bright and good doctors that are enthusiastic and that are own personality. Like, we're not looking for one personality type. We're just looking for people that get on with people and can do the job well. So it's not rocket science. I was going to say something else. I want to give a shout out to Rachel. So I think it was about last year, Rachel wandered into my theatre, even more wide-eyed than Bridget at the time, because she was just a medical student on her first day of anaesthetics, I think. And she said, isn't it a shame that we can't learn about anaesthesia until like much later? She says the surgical people have this like surgical, what did you call it, Rachel? They have like a surgical student society and medical student society, but there's nothing for critical care. Anyway, by the end of the day, she was accosted by myself and Professor David Story, and PVACCS was born, really. And it just came out of one little conversation. It just goes to show that's kind of thing we're looking at. She had a great idea. she told the right person in that luckily I was listening to her, and David's story was luckily in the next theatre. So she got a bit of the right backing, and then she's had the motivation to bring some key stakeholders together and make it actually work. So I think it's a great story. So I'm really proud of what you've achieved, Rachel, and hopefully you're all benefiting. So she's going to have something nice on her CV. So you're competing against people like Rachel to get the job. I feel I might be starting to waffle.
No, that's great. I could listen to you talk all night.
Well,
That's part of the anaesthetist skill, right? That's
yeah, exactly. Very
Hopefully you
engaging
won't fall
and
asleep.
just talk and talk.
And the penguin question was really to disrupt. Just going back to that, the question we asked the interview was what would you do if you found a penguin in the freezer, which Claire Berry alluded to, and I found it on the internet, and it's designed so you can't have a pre-designed question. So all that training that Claire does for you, we get a lot of people with relatively prepared answers. So this was just to find out a bit about people's personality. Hopefully relax them a bit and find a bit of humour in their personality. So it was a brilliant question on the other side of the fence as well. Well, I loved it anyway. It's become quite famous. All right. I'll happy to take questions, or we'll do that later.
Awesome. Yeah. I'm not sure if our last speaker has arrived, so we actually might just do questions because they're starting to pile up.
I am here, ma'am.
Oh, amazing. Sorry, I'm not. We're trying to see. Okay, awesome. I will just get Grace to introduce you, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Well, hi, everybody. So our third speaker for the anaesthetics portion of the night is Dr. Ned Douglas. So he's a consultant anaesthetist at the Royal Melbourne Hospital, as well as a retrieval physician with Adult Retrieval Victoria. He completed medical school at Monash University and has spent time in rural and regional Victoria, including Mildura. He's completed a master's in disaster and emergency response, as well as being active in the research community. So my pleasure to introduce Dr. Ned Douglas.
Thanks, Grace. I appreciate that. Would it be possible to make me a co-host so I could share some photos, just because I can't have Bridget being the only person with dog pictures on the night. It's a very important part of the presentation.
I mean, I won't say no to dog photos.
Yeah, I know that you've got a cute dog, very similar to Lucy.
Indeed. We should make it clear, it is not compulsory to have a poodle-related dog to get onto anaesthesia training, but it does appear not to help, so not to harm, I should say. Let me see if that'll share now. Oh, brilliant. Cool. Let me fire this up. Well, first off, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and have a chat. Partly because I'm stuck in hotel quarantine in Brisbane. So this is the most people I get to see for 2 weeks, which is great, but we'll cover a little bit about that later on. But I was just kind of asked to talk about what life as an anaesthetist is. I'm a relatively junior consultant, so I can kind of see the transition across from being a junior doctor into being an anaesthetist. And as will become clear, I have almost unlimited enthusiasm for the job. I'm not doing this at 3 AM on a Sunday morning, so that helps, but there's very little that I dislike about it. One of the things I was kind of asked to talk about was, what do we do? And I think both Bridget and Brett kind of talked about a lot of these kind of concepts already, so I'll try not to hark on them. But I think in lots of ways, these talks are about trying to decide whether you belong in the tent and whether it sounds like yourself. And I think if some of these ideas do sound like you, then anaesthesia is an excellent choice. So the biggest thing I say is it's a generalist specialty, and there's lots of versions of that joke. It's general medicine without the clinics or the nursing homes, except there is quite a few nursing homes, so don't don't get too excited about that. It's surgery without the cutting. It's psychiatry without the inpatient unit. It's public health without having a public health degree. So there's all sorts of things that we do. And just to really go back to what Bridget was saying earlier, this is why you shouldn't specialise in it too early. So there is that kind of pressure to find a way to convince someone like Brett to hire you, and that's always difficult because it seems like doing inside the specialty is a good way to demonstrate enthusiasm and stuff, which it is. I'm not denying that. But the things that make you a good anaesthetist come from all these different other parts of medicine. And my observation of people who do lots of different things is that they tend to make much better registrars and better anaesthetists overall if they've come with a bit of a mix of different things. The other thing I'd say is it's a really big specialty. So to put it in context, there's about 28,000 GPs, there's about 10,000 psychiatrists, and there's a bit over 3,500 anaesthetists. The next biggest specialty drops down to about 2,000 people in Australia. So it means that while there's lots of jokes about anaesthetists being a single personality type or a single, look like a single person, it's very much not. And when I look around my department, the joke I usually make is weird. I didn't know weird came in so many different varieties, but the breadth of personality style and structure and people and life experience and background is pretty amazing. And if you're worried about there being room for you inside anaesthesia, there definitely is, because we've accommodated all sorts of other people previously. So, and it's worth saying that for every surgeon, there has to be at least one anaesthetist when you map it out like that. And it means that we're quite a big specialty. There's lots of us. You'll have lots of colleagues. Some of the kind of qualities that make you better at it, I think, over time is having a bit of a curious frame of mind that's about facilitating care. So it tends to suit people who want to be a general and give commands less well overall. So it's really a lot of our role is about facilitating care and getting people to see things in different ways and make systems work. It means we always work in a team. So despite the efforts of some of the psychiatrists to adapt anaesthetic drugs to treat, psychiatric problems, we're still yet to find a problem that's solely cured by anaesthetic drugs. A possible exception of serotonin toxicity, but that's about the only entry in that category. So we're always working with other people. We work with all kinds of incredibly talented and different people. And I think that's one of the things that really attracts me. And that's from all sorts of different craft groups. And that'll keep coming up as a theme over my talk. Because we work with lots of people who view themselves as leaders, and they often are, you have to have quite a specific leadership style to thrive. And it's a bit corny, but it sometimes gets described as a kind of servant or influential leadership style. So again, if you want to yell at people, anaesthesia is probably not the place. But if you're good at using empathy, understanding, insight, and questioning to get, to achieve an outcome or to help lead a team, then you'll fit in really well in anaesthesia and you'll find your jobs really easy. You need to be adaptable. So there's this joke going around that anaesthetists have a plan and can't deviate from it, or like a super hyper control people. But sometimes people might start out like that, or for really specific situations have that as a coping style. But really, if you can't, flow with what's going on in anaesthesia, you'll struggle. So it tends to suit people who are pretty adaptive. It tends to suit people who have a fairly low risk tolerance as well. So this kind of might help some people choose between different specialties in critical care, but if your risk tolerance is pretty low, you'll fit in well in anaesthesia, and because a lot of the focus is about anticipating and preventing problems before they occur. And lastly, you need to think in systems. So because we work in a team, because we are doing things that are more complicated than what we can do ourselves, you have to work with, influence, and use systems. And if you're about having one solution to a problem, anaesthesia is going to be challenging, because system approaches is how we solve problems most of the time in anaesthesia. In preparation for your interview, you should at least know about these ideas. So I'm not going to go through them in great detail, but this is what ANZCA thinks anaesthetists do. So it's not the full story by any measure of the situation, but these are some of the important bits. On the right-hand side here, this stuff about roles in practice is how I would encourage you to think about how you can make yourself more competitive. So if you can demonstrate that these are the things that you do, or that your CV tells the story, or that your cover letter expresses some of these ideas, then you'll probably, construct a good case for being an interesting, prospect as an anaesthetist. But that's kind of all I'm going to say about selection, because I don't have any great insights. But my tip is to focus on some of this stuff, and it's all on the ANZCA website. In terms of my own story, I had a really weird path into anaesthesia. So I've got diabetes myself. I've had it since I was 2 years old. And boy, was I sure as a medical student that I was going to be a paediatric endocrinologist. And not to diss anybody who works at a particularly prestigious hospital in Melbourne, but I did a research project as a student there, and I discovered they were the wrong type of weird for me, and I just couldn't really cope with the people that I'd worked with. So that was really helpful. I was grateful for having that experience, and decided to try something else. And I got this great mentor from the Alfred, who was a really nice guy. He was on my surf lifesaving patrol, and was really interesting and smart. And I met some medical registrars in Mildura who seemed to know the answer to everything, and it was all very exciting. So I was like, right, I'll be a respiratory physician, like my mentor was. And that was great. I completely stuffed the interview. So at the Alfred, I was interviewed by a clinical haematologist that some years later I actually met on the beach through my mentor. She'd come down to spend time with him, and I was like, oh, I remember you. You interviewed me, and a lab haematologist told me I was boring as feedback for that interview. So it had clearly gone tragically. But I then interviewed at the Royal Melbourne, got a job, and I did probably too much general medicine, to be honest. I think if I'd done a bit less as an intern, I probably would be a respiratory physician now. But I burnt out of that process, and I realised there were some parts of it that weren't really rewarding me. And so in that time, I was quite enjoying chaos as a thing. And so, and I did a lot of time in the emergency department, and met some great people, and had some really interesting experience. And so I kind of changed track, I'll be an emergency physician. And I applied for a critical care year, largely because I wanted to have some anaesthetic experience before I really decided and some ICU experience before I really decided if I'd do ED or ICU. Because the thing that flows through all of these ideas is kind of physiology, and particularly physiology loops have been something I've dealt with my entire life, and find pretty intuitive and interesting. So I thought I'd do those two. I had to be a bit creative with my answers to the anaesthetists who run the program at the Royal Melbourne, but I got a job. And then I realised once I landed in anaesthesia that this really was the group of people that I kind of enjoyed the most. And some of the things at the start of that training program that I really picked up, or the critical care year that I really picked up, are on the left-hand side of the screen. And they're things that I'm going to talk around over the rest of the presentation, that I still think are really important. And often, if they're the things you're looking for in a career, then anaesthetic training will suit you pretty well. Just to pick up on some of the things people said, anaesthesia is a really big field that deals with all sorts of patients. So it's worth saying there's kind of general anaesthetic training. And then if you wanted to do one of these things that are up on the screen, you'll probably need some more experience or some more training to do it. ANZCA has the fellowship year in its training program, which is really great. So if you decide you want to be a subspecialised paediatric anaesthetist, then there's a pathway for that. One of the great things about the Anaesthetic College, at the very least, is that they love writing things down. And so if you've ever got a question somewhere on the ANSCO website, the answer to that question exists. But these are all kind of defined things that you can do to add colour or kind of depth of experience to your anaesthetic training. So for me, the things I pull out are kind of, I do a lot of perioperative medicine stuff and a bit of retrieval, and a bit of research. And so if you're kind of trying to build a very involved anaesthetic career, then you can pull from many or all of these if you've got all the time in the world. But you can pull out things that are really different from each other, using anaesthetic training as the starting point to get involved in some of this stuff. In terms of what I do personally, I do 4 days a week at the Royal Melbourne, which keeps me out of trouble, and I do a day a week in retrieval. So then I kind of have, I'm doing a PhD at the moment and involved in a few trials that are going on, and I do a bunch of stuff that's outside the hospital. So I have a few kind of clinical governance and advisory roles at Surf Lifesaving and in event medicine, and work a bit with groups around. Obviously being the most important for most stuff. Oops. In terms of what that means, 4 clinical shifts, so 3 at Melbourne. I'm about 50% in theatre and 50% out of theatre. So as we talked about, there's lots of things you can do outside. It's worth saying that as an anaesthetic consultant, you're not working with a trainee 100% of the time, or even close to it. So in contrast to lots of other specialties in medicine, your job doesn't completely change the moment that you finish training. So one of the reasons physicians work in private is so that they still do some medicine, because supervising trainees to do stuff is quite a different job to doing it yourself. And one of the great advantages of anaesthetic training, at least in the kind of very public focused roles that I have, is that you get some time, helping people learn and supervising and that sort of stuff, but also you do actually have to be good at your job. And so for those that are looking for kind of practical hands-on sort of stuff, anaesthesia is great. We heard before about kind of mixing and matching anaesthesia and ICU, and certainly that has become a bit harder over time, but there's still lots of different roles in that. And it's worth saying, probably to the chagrin of some of the intensivists, that anaesthetists still provide a lot of ICU around Australia. So particularly if you're going to work somewhere rurally or work in retrieval, then ICU is a really big part of your job. Maybe not with the same depth of training as intensive care physicians, but the opportunity to work with them and work in a kind of more, a less procedural environments might be interesting to some people. I run a perioperative medicine multidisciplinary meeting. So again, collaboration keeps coming up as this theme, but it's a kind of really, really important part of the job. And if you can't talk to patients and you can't talk to colleagues, then anaesthesia will be difficult. And so if you're looking for stuff doing that, anaesthesia really is it. I often do a couple of days in research, so you can do as much or as little as you want of that in anaesthesia. It's still the case that you don't require a PhD to get a job in a public hospital, which is great. So you can do it if you want to, but in contrast to some of the physician and surgical specialties, it's not an absolute prerequisite yet. And then I do a bunch of stuff in kind of the non-clinical space. So again, this is up to you to choose what you want to do. Sometimes the director will just pop stuff in your lap, which you'll learn to manage. But it's something that if you work in a big public hospital, then you can get really engaged across the hospital and do some of that system sort of stuff that we were talking about. In terms of time off, I'm lucky enough to do all the interesting stuff and still have a couple of days off a week, which is great. And I'll come back to this in a little bit, but some of the stuff I really enjoy is obviously Snickers, but also spending some time down at the beach and skiing when we're allowed to, and then a couple of hobbies. So this is the culmination of a few, but my tragic Lego obsession and my attempts at building furniture. So I haven't seen that in the last 5 weeks, and I just put it together before I came away. So I'm really hoping it's still intact when I get home. It's worth saying some specific things about what clinical work as a consultant's like. So it's worth knowing that you do, or in most hospitals, you'll do a mix of specialty work. So some people will design really specific, I only do big toes on Fridays sort of anaesthesia, but that's really not the norm. So again, adaptability, working with different people, they're all kind of really helpful things. It's worth saying that in contrast to some specialties, you'll have a really high level of ownership and responsibility. So sometimes that's a bit of a struggle for people to get used to, but generally it makes your job easier if you think about it in those sort of ways. And we end up talking, like one of the consequences of that is we end up talking about very kind of micro stuff a lot of the time, but that's kind of part of why that exists, and it's a real safety mechanism for anaesthetists. Picking up on what Brett said, over time you just get better at your job, and the kind of clinical challenge starts to be less acute, and you've made all the mistakes already. You kind of know how these things usually play out, and you've at least got some plans for if it doesn't go how you plan. So, you know, the actual clinical work becomes less of a cognitive burden, and you get to spend more time focusing on lots of other stuff. Probably the biggest thing I do is manage the team. So again, it's that leading through influence and getting people to do well. One of the ways my manager winds me up is if we're starting late, he'll come into the room and be like, I'm just here to help you make the right decision. As a tip in their future career, that is exactly what anaesthetists do. They help people make a right decision. But if you tell people you're doing that to them, they get really pissed off sometimes. As I said before, it's highly procedural. Get to do stuff with my hands. I don't just take phone calls and give 3-line pieces of advice, and that I really like. And so if you like that, you'll fit in. It's worth pointing out that there's, other than the people in the morgue, there's no patients you don't see. So if you're trying to hide from a particular specialty or particular group of patients, you just can't do. They will come back at some point. So it might not be the place. And I put a star next to pathologists just because increasingly they're requesting help for sedation for various procedures on actually alive patients that they're looking after. So we may have to engage with the final frontier at one point. I wanted to pick up on what Bridget said about the conversations we have. So I think this is the most important thing that we do. In similar to Brett, I'm kind of slightly mesmerised and surprised every time propofol works or the spinal actually produces a block. Like it continues to be a bit of a delight. But the technical and doing side of anaesthesia is learnable. But and I guess so is the talking to people. But one of the nicest parts of being an anaesthetist is being with people while they go through really meaningful events in their life. In contrast to the kind of some of the other critical care specialties that are very focused on things that are actually quite traumatic and distressing for people, one of the great things about anaesthesia is you get to be with some people while things are actually pretty happy, pretty good. And sometimes there can be some stress associated with that. But I would encourage you not to underestimate how nice it is to be with people who, are meeting their kid for the first time or are having surgery to correct something that's been a real problem for them for a long time, or, are being relieved of a problem like a cancer or something like that. It's a really incredibly meaningful time for them, and some of that rubs off. And so it's if you enjoy being rewarded by supporting people at that kind of time, then anaesthesia is really a great thing to do. In terms of the outside of the hospital stuff, some of these I've mentioned. you know, but it's really opened up all sorts of doors. This is me driving a rescue boat. I didn't fall out that time, but it's kind of a nice way to spend a summer afternoon sometimes. And I've done some work at music festivals. So if you're interested in kind of management side of stuff or doing stuff well outside of hospital and in pretty resource poor environments, and that's a good experience that's been opened up. I work at retrieval, and that's fascinating, and a whole kind of different package of skills and things to learn, but certainly anaesthetists still have a huge amount to do there. And this is the reason I'm in hotel quarantine. So I've just come back from 3 weeks in Fiji, helping with they had a real disastrous COVID problem that thankfully is settling down now. But kind of without being an anaesthetist, I wouldn't have had the right experience and training around that to be useful. So that was kind of a really nice thing to be able to do. Flip side is I'm in hotel quarantine, which is perhaps less nice, but doing anaesthetic training opens up all sorts of doors that you wouldn't imagine when you kind of imagine what does an anaesthetist do on a daily basis. Hannah asked me specifically to talk about some work-life balance stuff, which I think is a really important question. I'm going to try not to make this sound too gleeful, but in terms of the different critical care specialties, I can't think of a better environment for people who want to achieve work-life balance. It's worth saying that if you want to work yourself to death, you absolutely can in anaesthesia, like that. No one will stand in your way doing that. But if you don't, there's all sorts of options. So my observation, there's kind of 5 main patterns that I've put up, but basically the least employed anaesthetist works a day a week. The most employed anaesthetist works 6 or 7 days a week. You can choose your own adventure inside of that. You can choose a mix of public and private to facilitate it. You can choose how much responsibility you want to take on in each department. There's all sorts of control, but you just have a huge amount of control over what you do as a consultant and as a registrar, I should say. Some of the things that help facilitate that are that you don't do ward rounds, or at least you don't do ward rounds very often. So it means that other people are looking after your patients after they leave PACU, and that is a very liberating feeling, unless you're working in private, where you might still get phone calls about pain and nausea and stuff, but they're usually easy things to sort out. If you're working in public, generally there's someone who can take over a case from you if you have to leave. So that's one of the great advantages of anaesthesia training. Like, it's pretty regimented on how we get trainees to give anaesthetics, and that then means that it's pretty easy to hand them over because everyone's kind of on the same page. So if you are looking for that sort of flexibility, then public anaesthesia at least is very helpful. It's worth saying that when you're on call, you don't get called very much. There is a flip side to that, which is that if you do get called, the patient is usually very unwell and you will need to come into the hospital most of the time because you can't give an anaesthetic from your couch. And so if you like ownership and being on top of things, then anaesthesia helps. But it does mean when you're not on call, you're just not going to get called. There's nobody ringing you about your private patient that you last saw 5 years ago that might have something wrong with them that you might have an opinion on. So in that way, it's really pretty liberating. So you can go away without having to make all sorts of ridiculous arrangements to get yourself covered. The downsides are that on-call does exist, and it's not just theoretical on-call. So, if you don't want to ever be called, I'd suggest doing dermatology, maybe even a phthel, though they get called occasionally. But it's not that. And it's worth also observing that if you work a lot in private, then you probably have less control over the work you're doing. So you've either got to have a great relationship with your private surgeon, or be prepared to stay till whenever the list finishes. It's worth saying that also you get into the hospital a little bit earlier and you go home a little bit later than your colleagues. So generally I'll be there before this, or I'll be there significantly before the surgeon, and I tend to leave after the surgeons and the nursing staff as well. And that's just that links to that kind of sense of responsibility and ownership that you have. You need to kind of get things sorted for the day, get them set up, and then get the patient safely in recovery and appropriate to leave. My personal view is, unless you've specifically handed over a patient, you shouldn't leave until they're safe. I hope most people agree with me, but that is something to keep in mind. Lastly, on this kind of work-life balance, I think it's worth talking about families, because we've noticed, or at least since I started anaesthetic training, things have changed and people need different things out of training and out of being a consultant. But I just wanted to be reassuring around that. So when I started, it was quite unusual for people to have kids during training, but now it is unusual for people not to have children during training in our hospital. So it's been a big change, but that's, I think, for the better overall. And looking around my consultant colleagues, there's only 5 out of 62. So it's like 7 or 8% or something who don't actually have children at RMH. So it's certainly a specialty that is learning to cope with the idea of families in training and families as consultants. And one of the great things about working in a big team where there's lots of people is that if you do need time or leave or short-term leave for families and stuff, then that's actually quite easy to arrange. There's always someone who'll swap. There's always someone who can cover your list. There's always someone who can help, that sort of stuff. It's worth knowing, though, that nights and after hours are a big part of the registrar job, as I'm sure Bridget would agree. But there are like really specific developed plans for people to have time off during training and to work flexibly during training, which I won't bore you with the details, but they're on the ANZCO website written down as promised. I was just looking at them before. It is worth saying that different places are probably differently flexible, or at least you hear stories about them being differently flexible. So if that's an important issue for you, I would highly recommend investigating it. Specifically, both Brett and I from the Northwest Training Scheme hospitals, and the experience I'm describing, I think, describes most people in the Northwest, but other places may be different, is the disclaimer. Everyone wants to know about the downsides. I did actually do some work about thinking of stuff that I didn't enjoy, but I do this talk internally at the Royal Melbourne, and the respiratory physician who runs it there always wants to wind me up. Like, how can you stand talking to surgeons or working with surgeons? And I never saw myself as somebody defending surgeons, but 2021 is a really unique experience. But conflict is a part of our job. And it can be challenging at the start of anaesthetic training, certainly. But my observation is, as you get more experienced in the job, conflict just becomes less and less and less of a problem. So I can't actually remember the last time that I had a standout argument with anyone in theatre, and certainly not with a surgeon. I think what we often do is get involved in mediating conflict between other people in the theatre complex. And again, that comes down to using influence to kind of, make sure the experience of work is for, the best that it can be for people. So if you're rewarded by that, anaesthesia is great. But fundamentally, I wouldn't be put off anaesthesia training by the presence of surgeons or by the idea that conflict is a part of the job, because there are always disagreements about how to approach a problem. But one of the things anaesthesia training does well is train you to manage those conflicts and those disagreements, and you'll just get good at it by the time that you finish training. It's worth saying that a lot of people in the theatre complex, particularly patients, but not only, are worried or anxious at certain times. So if you find that a difficult emotion or a difficult defence to be around, then you might need to get some tips on how to manage that. So I'll be the first to say that, I found the level of anxiety in some of my colleagues and patients pretty challenging at the start, but again, it's something that you get better at. And it's worth recognising that we don't come with an inbuilt plan on how to manage other people's anxiety. That's something that you can learn over time and that you might need to invest in. It's worth saying that in anaesthesia, similar to dermatology, there are bad outcomes from time to time, depending on where you work. But it's it's worth acknowledging that some patients don't do well, and that can be quite challenging. It's worth saying that as an anaesthetic consultant, you're always involved in teaching people. So if you find that frustrating or difficult, then anaesthesia is probably not the right place for you. So the biggest tip, and I think I gave this tip to Bridget, but it was like, you just need, in terms of, getting into anaesthetic training, you've just got to recognise that the consultants are going to spend 5 years sitting next to you day in, day out. So you kind of have to be somebody that is going to be interesting, enjoyable to work with, work hard, all of those sort of things. And that's the thing, being those sort of things tends to be the things that get you good references. So I still laugh with some of my mentors about how little I knew as an HMO. One in particular still asks me what the changes in the pattern of respiration that occur with volatile anaesthesia are. I still don't know the answer to that. I got through the primary and the second part exam. I probably should have learnt it at some point. But Robin misses no opportunity to ask me yet again, and I still haven't got around to learning it. So it's not about what you know, it's about that sort of experience of people that experience with people that you have. So it's just something to keep in mind. If you don't like training people, anaesthesia is not for you. And it's worth saying that we don't know what to do about lots of problems. We don't know how anaesthetic drugs work. Anyone who tells you they do is lying. It's a great mystery. We don't know whether keeping the blood pressure at X or Y is the right thing to do, even though lots of people have strong opinions. We don't know, how to guarantee good outcomes. So you've got to sit with a lot of that and be aware that, it's a specialty that's still learning a lot. In terms of personal stuff, the things I don't like about the job is sometimes I'm tired, sometimes I'm bored. And that I think is worthwhile just acknowledging, but it's not to say it's the dominant experience. This comes up for me about once a month, give or take. And it's worth saying that if you get into some positions, you can be quite isolated, but I'd suggest trying to make sure that doesn't happen.
Sorry, Ned, sorry to interrupt. Just wanted to mention that we might need to wrap up soon and maybe move on to questions for the sake of time. But
my apologies.
Thanks. It has been great so far.
All good.
Yeah.
This I've already said before, so I'm going to leave you with one joke. So if you're not sure how to choose a critical care specialty, pick what you like the most. But I did want to quickly say that none of the critical care specialties are particularly different from each other. Everybody who works in one could work in another. It really comes down to finding the mentors and people that you gel with the most and avoiding the parts of the different specialties that you dislike the most. So I know somebody is asking which specialty should I choose because I can't decide between all of them. But unfortunately, that does need to come from inside you. But yeah, I will shut up and move on. But thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much for that. That was fabulous. Appreciate Rachel too for the bit of the timekeeping there. I've just been told that Bridget has got some extra tips she'd like to share. Bridget.
Nothing too major. I guess I just thought I would share some tips for medical students in theatre, maybe on a surgical term, wanting to get some anaesthetic experience. And all I'd say to you is that the surgery doesn't happen until the patient is anaesthetized. So you've got all of that part of the patient experience to potentially get involved with. So if you get there early, find out who your anaesthetist is, introduce yourself. And, I've even, because I really do enjoy teaching, I've gone, hey, you, medical student glued to the wall, come over here. Do you want to put an LMA in? Do you want to put a drip in? Even if you don't end up doing anaesthetics, practicing drips is invaluable no matter what you do. And then having basic airway skills, bag mask ventilating an unconscious person, putting an LMA in, whatever, that's all useful. And often your surgical doctors are very happy to hand you off to do that bit and then have you on the other side. So definitely get involved if you want. I should say, I realized I didn't talk about the training program, but all that information's on the ANSCA website. Essentially, it's 2 years of basic training, 2 years of advanced training with some specialty stuff, and a year of fellowship where you get to do something fun. The key bit that I skipped over, not on purpose, is that there's a tiny little quiz called the first part exam that you sit in basic training. And there's also another little quiz called the fellowship exam at the end. So, but I would say that exams are a part of every single specialty training. So I wouldn't let the number or difficulty of exams influence your choices.
Fabulous. All right. Thank you very much. And thank you on behalf of your medical students as well who get roped in for those kinds of things. If I could get the Q&A up, the Slido, Rachel, if you're able to share that. I should say too, we're aware of time. Be fantastic to have you all to stick around to answer some questions, but also if you need to leave, that's also understandable. So just a reminder to everybody here as well. So we're using Slido. You can actually go into that link that's just over there and upvote questions because we're going to be taking them from the top. So the first question is, do you have to train at a large tertiary centre to get into critical care training programs, or do you have to work at a Big 4 centre? Feel free.
I'll take this one. Yes and no. So at Austin Hospital will take you from wherever you are from, it's a level playing field. So anybody, we've taken people from interstate, the country, we'll take from anywhere.
That's true. My year was 12 people, 2 from the Austin, 10 from elsewhere.
We just want the best of the best. The problem is the competition aspect and what's available at the tertiary centres. And it's just much easier to get research done, get audits done, and just build your CV in tertiary centres or bigger centres. Doesn't have to necessarily be tertiary. So that's where some people can differentiate themselves, but you can do it from anywhere. So we're not fussed, but if you're not in a tertiary setup, you're just going to be aware of what the competition's doing.
Yep, makes sense to me. Just make the best of where you are, I guess. So thank you for that. Next question is, what would be a good plan B if you didn't get the Crit Care HMO year in PGY 3 or 4? Is there other lateral entry into the training program?
I mean, from what I've seen, I would say yes. I think you certainly need references from anaesthetists that are intensivists, emergency physicians, particularly anaesthetists. That helps in terms of getting onto the program. But when it comes to the HMO crit care job, I mean, yeah, I found that my surgical experience behind me was useful, and that's something that you could do a surgical year. Like, you're always in theatre, you're seeing what anaesthetists are doing. Equally, medical stuff's really useful. Like, I'm so glad I did a neurology term as an intern, because I do all the neuraxial reviews and examine, people's lower limbs if they've got a funny tingle or something. So you can, honestly, you can tweak anything that you do to be suitable, because anaesthesia is that varied. That's from my perspective anyway.
I think it's quite simple. Plan A is the Austin Crit Care program, and Plan B is like Royal Melbourne or Monash or something. Like, that should be a Plan B.
I love the advertising in there. That's great.
Yeah, no, you have to get a crit care program. It doesn't have to be in a Big 4 hospital, but you do have to get your 3 months experience to apply for a registrar job. So you've got to keep banging on the doors until you get something.
And there are unaccredited registrar jobs that allow for entry into training. So those at the moment exist at Eastern Health, Peter Mac, Shepparton, and a couple of other regional centres. So unaccredited registrar jobs do exist. And the way that ANSCA works is that you can actually you know, sit the primary exam, be an independent trainee, and then get an accredited training job, which I've had a few friends do.
And the regional ones can give you a lot of experience as well.
Yep, good to keep in mind for those interviews, I'm sure. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, everybody. I think that next question's similar to this one. So, how important is getting the HMO3 job? As it rare? Yeah, I think.
But you don't have to get it as an HMO3. You can get it as an HMO4, 5, 6 if you've done something else. But you have to get an HMO3 job before you get a reg job.
Yep. Nope, good to know. Thank you. All right. So next, is it worthwhile doing courses such as basic ALS1, basic TTE, etc. as a student?
No, so no. ALS, I would say, is it like I feel like I need to do a basic echo course and I'm 6 years out on a program, right? That's basic, I think, is better for junior doctors. So it's just, I think, keep up to date with the ALS, maybe go to some conferences or something, but you won't get anything out of it. The point of doing a course is not just to put it on your CV, it's to actually get valuable vocational learning experiences, and all that's going to go over your head as a student.
Yeah, I might just jump in. Until COVID kind of tanked it, I was coordinating the NatCat course that the Royal Melbourne runs, and every year, for some reason, mostly from Queensland, we had 30 participants come in the intern year, and I've never seen people as confused as I did that day every year. So you need to put your learning in context and do what's useful for you. So ALS1, I think, is useful for people about to be interns, but most of the other ones require you to have some exposure to even make sense of, and that's when you should try and line them up. They do help, but only a small amount in terms of getting onto training. So there are points on the CV stuff, but they're not quite as important as people sometimes make them out. And doing them earlier, I actually think, is a disadvantage because you often just have to redo them during training anyway. So, and as a really hot tip, the ALS2 course only is accredited by ANZCA if it's done in the 6 months before your training. So keep that in mind if you want to save cash.
I can say, from the Austin HMO perspective, is we try not to empower a industry of everyone doing multiple courses and spending a lot of money. So, it does not affect the ability to get a critical care HMO program, at least with us at the moment.
No, that's all good info. Thank you. Next question is, realistically, what kind of remuneration can one expect as a consultant anaesthetist? Well, as Ned spoke about, I'm sure it varies wildly with type of job, but if anyone wants to speak to it.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think if you read the paper and you look at the average statistics, according to the tax office, it's around the 400 to 500K mark. Less in public, more in private, depending on exactly what private you do and how you set yourself up. Some people, you hear stories about people overcharging and things, but that's the kind of ballpark figure.
I mean, even as a trainee, you can be comfortable. I think the real value that it adds is the job security. And that's particularly valuable applying for a mortgage or whatever. I think, you don't have to pay lender's mortgage insurance as a doctor. So yeah, there's job security. And yeah, I mean, it would vary a lot, but even as a trainee, it's okay. But, you do spend a lot of money as a trainee, sitting the exams, paying college fees. So, for example, 2019, when I sat the primary, it was $6,000 for the privilege of sitting the exam. That's in addition to $3,500 for being part of the college and a whole bunch of other things like APRA fees, insurance, whatever. So, but that's, I mean, again, that's true for all specialties, and there are some exams that are eye-wateringly more expensive.
we're paid really well. We've got almost no overheads as well. So it's not like we have to run a room and a secretary and things that the surgeons have to do. So it is pretty good. But we're not orthopedic or plastic surgeon money.
Did I see that you want to jump in there, Claire?
I was going to say it's $450 for the ICU consultants at the moment for full-time interstate.
That's good to know. Thank you. Just in the interest of time, I might make this the last question. That says, realistically, is there much students can do in medical school to prepare for these exams or applications, or is it something more for internship and beyond?
Just throw in 2 cents, I guess. You know, the difficult time-consuming bits of the CV to do the research component, and that would be my tip. If you've got, you know, as a student, even though it might not feel like it, you often have much more spare time than you think you do. And doing research offers you the opportunity to build a relationship with the department and with people who may well turn out to be, you know, quite handy as referees further on, etc., etc. In terms of studying for the exam, for the love of God, do not do that. That is a complete waste of time. You're much better off focusing on the exams you've got in front of you to finish medical school. And courses, I think we've already talked about, but I don't, you know, in similar to Brett, I don't see a lot of value in spending a lot of money, especially as a student, to do courses that will be marginally relevant to your learning at the time.
So it will surprise you how much of your like pre-clinical stuff will come back to haunt you for the primary exam. But you'll forget it and learn it again. That's fine. That's what we all do.
And then forget it again. Still can't draw the brachial plexus.
No, fabulous. All right. Thank you very much. I think we might leave it there if the rest of PVACCS is all right with that, just keeping time in mind. Thank you so much, all three of you. In fact, our ICU speakers as well. I know I've got a lot out of tonight. As somebody who's still in preclinical, it's nice to actually, you know, talk to some people that are in the job and learn a lot more about it. Does anybody else like to say anything? Rachel, possibly?
I just wanted to, I guess, thank everyone again. Thanks, Bridget, Brett and Ned for coming and offering your time to give your presentations and answer questions. And sorry for going over time. We'll wrap up quickly so we can release you. And also thank you to our sponsors, Grimsby and Claire Berry. Thank you to everyone for coming, asking all these great questions. And if you want to leave feedback or suggestions for next year, we have a survey if you want to fill out, which is in chat. Really proud of how far PVACCS has come. I'm personally really glad that I've gone to meet so many great people to work with, like everyone in the committee, but also really glad to have met Hannah, who the other co-chair. A great pleasure to work with. And yeah, like this is what our work has come to. So thank you everyone. Thanks.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks for having me. All the best, guys. And if you see me in theatre, come and say hi and pop an airway in or something.
Thanks.
Sounds great. Thanks, everyone.